Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is me. Okay, that was a really lame start. I'm very sorry. So no, this is not a draw my life, but oh my god, that didn't even erase. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. I had talked about doing this in my author's journal vlogs when I started this spring semester of classes, and I really wanted to show you guys a first draft to final draft look at my short story and talk about why I made the changes that I did. I'm going to go over some of the feedback that my professor, Chris Mooney, gave. I will link his stuff down below too because he is an amazing thriller writer. Oh, should I be like drawing? Would that be cooler? Link down below. Look, I'm artistic. Guys, I'm the worst drawer. But I just thought that kind of video would be really valuable. Not saying that I am so filled with knowledge and educated in creative writing now that my final draft is just so perfect, but just to kind of give you an inside peek at what I did, the changes I made. I'm actually pretty nervous to share this with you guys just because this is going to be the first real look at my writing. But I figure, you know what, it's best you kind of see it now because then you don't have to waste money on a book if you don't like it. I'm like only partially kidding. I want to address too though, before you read anything I've written, that my writing style for this class was a little bit different than how, actually I should kind of say a lot of bit different in my opinion, how I normally write. So this was a suspense fiction class and my short story is specifically aimed at suspense writing. So I was trying different techniques than what I normally do. The sentence structure is a lot simpler, the pace is a lot faster, and there's not as much description and prose. I mean, it's a short story too, so obviously I couldn't really get too much into the world, at least not with my skill level, in my opinion. It was just really a fast-paced thriller. I don't know if you'd call it a thriller, a mystery, a drama, I'm not really sure. But anyway, I wanted to give that disclaimer just because I feel the style of the novel that I'm working on is, in my opinion, a little bit different than how I wrote this short story. I kind of took a lot of risks with this. Basically what I'm saying is I'm really nervous for you guys to read it. And I know I have a lot of new subscribers, so welcome. Hopefully you don't get like sick of looking at my veiny hands. I have man hands. I always say when it's really hot, I get so veiny. So, but to all my new subscribers, welcome to my channel. I look forward to disappointing you with my video. I'm just kidding. Sorry, I'm like being really harsh on myself today. I'm really uncomfortable. This is nervous laughter. But seriously, welcome. I was going to do my Australia vlog after this. I filmed so many little clips, but then I was like, you know what? I don't want that to be the first video that all these new people see. They're gonna be like, I thought this was a writing channel. What the heck is she doing, like filming koalas? I will upload that next though, so you can see the koalas. I think they're cute. And so I should start off saying that all of my versions of my short story, my first draft, my second draft, and my final draft are going to be linked down below. I'm probably going to put them in a Google Drive. I thought about doing Wattpad, but then I couldn't really upload PDFs. At least to my knowledge, I actually haven't done any research on what Wattpad really is. I have never read fan fiction or anything like that. So, but a Google Drive I thought would be better anyway, because I also want to include some critiques sent from other classmates of mine that I found particularly valuable. Everybody's feedback was valuable, but there are some feedbacks that really I used their reasoning in my changes that maybe my professor hadn't mentioned. So I wanted to upload that as well. I think, you know, it's so easy to talk about revisions and changes and tips and like how to make your story more interesting, but when you get a real world example of what somebody did or changes they made, I feel like it makes such a huge difference. One of the things my professor did for this class was he showed us his own short stories and why he made the changes he did, and it just blew my mind how useful that was. So that's why I really want to show you my first draft and my final draft specifically, so you can kind of see why I did what I did, and you can see how bad my first draft was. I mean, I got a C, guys, on my first draft, and I ended up getting an A on the final. Well, an A minus, okay, but it's still an A, right? And so I just wanted to show that things can be improved, and editing does make such a huge difference. Even though I didn't change an astronomical amount from the first draft to the final draft, just making little changes and tying that story together with reoccurring themes and making the pacing more even and making sure each character counts and each choice in your story counts makes a huge difference, So I guess I'll get started. So the reason I have this, first I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what I learned in this class in general. So it was about suspense fiction writing, which I felt I really needed, because even though I feel my novel has a lot of suspenseful things, I recognize in my own writing that it's a little bit draggy, especially in the first chapters, which is a huge problem because those first chapters are how you're going to hook your viewer. Oh my god, I've been doing YouTube too long. Your reader, not your viewer. And so my teacher put it so simply in our first class. Basically, he said suspense is, I want to know what happens next. And so a big thing that was stressed in this class was beginning our short stories with an action scene. Now, I'll go more into what that means when I showcase my own short story. That doesn't mean like you come in and your characters are literally punching each other. It just means that your character is in motion. They're moving. They're not sitting there pondering. They're not, you know, it's not some descriptive opening scene describing the beautiful field in front of you. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with that. There's plenty of novels where that open like that and they are wonderful. But this is a technique he stressed for suspense writing as a way to really hook your reader right away. Another really important part of your opening is to always pose questions, not answers. Now, I don't mean question after question after question where your reader's going to start getting frustrated, but to keep them turning the page, cliffhangers, so to speak. So one example we used at the beginning of the class was the opening chapter of Silence of the Lambs. And if you read that first chapter, you'll see the scene unfolds in real time. We don't get this large exposition of text explaining what's going on. The scene starts with an action. Clarice is heading to her boss's office. We don't know why. We don't know really even who Clarice quite is yet, but it jumps into the action right away, and that keeps us hooked. Another really important part, and I totally planned on using this way more than I have, but well. So one of the things that I've noticed with my writing that I'm hoping to get better at is my story kind of starts, you know, it's suspenseful, stuff's going on, and then I like to kind of dip back down, you know, add some description, add some backstory, and then I might climb up again, and then it kind of dips back down. And this is some of the feedback I also got on my short story, that I tended to do this. And I don't want to say it's okay in a novel because I don't think that's necessarily the case, but in a short story, you definitely don't want to do this, especially a suspense short story. So one of the things that he really stressed was to always have rising tension. The tension in the story, the action in the story, not the action, the conflict in the story, the risk in the story is always rising. And one way to keep that suspense as well is to end each paragraph with sort of a cliffhanger. I kind of wish I had Silence of the Lambs in front of me right now to give you a good example, but I don't have a physical copy of it. But if you look at Silence of the Lambs or any reputable thriller book, you will see the last sentence in each paragraph kind of leaves you on a cliffhanger. It makes you realize, oh my god, I have to go to the next one. Okay, so enough of the theoretical stuff, because I think that's all fine and dandy, but without real world examples, it's pretty much useless. So, not that my story is like the perfect example or anything, but I tried to utilize these techniques that we learned. And so when we were talking about the opening scene of our story, one of the things that he had us do was to really think about what our story was going to open with and what our goal and desire of our main character is. So one thing he really pressed, especially with a short story, is that the first scene has to be what your story is about. It has to directly relate to the conflict, to the theme, symbolism, whatever you have you. He gave us, to quote him directly, don't lead us into it, dump the character into the scene. Think of it like dropping your kid in the deep end of the pool, watching him or her swim. Dump your character into the deep end of the pool. So before I jump into the attached first draft and the attached final draft, I also have something uploaded onto my link called Opening Scene, or what is it titled? Bascom Opening Scene Short Story, something like that. And that's where I had to write my first scene, kind of what I was talking about in the assignment that we were assigned, and he gave sort of a rewritten example of how he would do it that really picked up the pace in it. And while I didn't do all of the changes he suggested, you can kind of see if you read his top part in red and then what I had originally written below, how much faster paced his version was than what I first did. So just to read the first paragraph of that, again, you can follow along with that linked document in the description. So to start with what I wrote, The police knocked again. Sarah shuffled quickly down the hall, praying they wouldn't go for a third round. She would have reached the door in time had it not been her husband's boots. In the dark, she stubbed her toe hard against the brand new L.L. Bean steel boots he had to have for Christmas, despite working in an office. The sound of the third round of knocks, heavier than the last, drowned out her cursing, but did not drown out the baby's sudden screams. And he changed it very simply, too. Sarah jumped up from the couch when she heard the soft knock. She checked herself in the hallway mirror to make sure her hair didn't look too frightening and then opened the front door. So it pretty much removed all of that description that I had. And then the second paragraph he wrote, the policeman standing underneath the dim porch light had a thick black beard and the body of a former football player who had let himself go in middle age. That description of the policeman for me didn't happen until, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4... about 5 or 6 paragraphs down. So it does really tighten it. You know, how much do you really need to know about her husband's Christmas boots at this point? Is it important? No, you understand her frustration, but that can be conveyed much quicker and later in the story than if we were to just jump in straight with the action like he suggested. So with those 2 suggestions in mind, let's look at what I actually ended up doing for the first draft of my full short story. So now for my lovely examples. So I have with me 3 different drafts of my story. Which one is the first draft? This one's the first draft. This is the final draft. Okay. With my professor's notes all over them, you can see just how much it got marked up. So, hey guys, it's me from the future. I totally realized after I ended this that I never really told you guys what my short story is even about. So basically my story is about a woman named Sarah who is a new stay-at-home mom. She's having a hard time adjusting to the role. Her and her husband are fighting, and she is a former NYPD detective who has recently moved back home to Maine due to an administrative leave that was obviously not voluntary. And one night she sees a fire from across the harbor and she starts to investigate it. And it looks as though there might be a town arson and it might be a little bit more close to home than she was hoping for. You guys, I totally suck at synopsises. Clearly. So why don't you just give it a read yourself, look it over. Yeah, because I can't. It's my biggest weakness. Oh my god, I'm like cringing talking about it. I can't do it. Somebody please write my synopsis for my stories for me because I really can't. I'm not exactly sure what the best order to do this in. As I mentioned, I have all 3 drafts uploaded onto my Google Drive. If you want, you can always just read the whole short story itself, the final draft. I recommend not reading the full first draft just because you're gonna be like, oh my god, this is a mess. And you would be right. So, but if you want to read the whole final draft and just kind of see where it started, up to you. You don't have to. But I'm going to just walk through some of the highlights of what I changed. I probably won't go through everything because this video would be hella long. Taking his advice in mind, I decided to open with my scene of my character already dealing with the consequences of her action, and we don't yet know what that action is. So my story kind of deals with a little bit of, I wouldn't say flashbacks, but we jump in right into the scene of her behaving in a way that is questionable and that immediately makes us think she might be an unreliable narrator, which I always love those kind of stories, and so I really wanted to play with that in my own short story. I will just read, should I read my final draft out? I'll just read the first paragraph of my first draft and then I will read you the first paragraph of my final draft and show you what I changed. So, this is called Burn by Haley Bascom. The cool water pooled gently over my arm, the burn transforming to a dulled ecstasy as I stared out the window, mesmerized by the slow burning fire. I lost track of time, hypnotized both by the relief of pain and the black smoke dissolving into the midnight clouds. A cloud, or smoke, soon covered up the moon, and suddenly the fire was the only source of light. So right away we are jumped into action. So my character is standing over a sink, or in the first draft you don't quite get that visual as strongly, which I ended up fixing, but she's standing over a sink, she's got a burn on her arm, and she's letting water pool over it. And it ends with a cliffhanger. A cloud or smoke soon covered up by the moon, and suddenly the fire was the only source of light. So immediately you're like, what fire? And it leads you to the next paragraph. Bang, bang. which, what was that? Leads you to the next paragraph. So to jump into what I ended up changing, so one thing my professor noted, so as I kind of addressed as I was reading out loud, there was some confusion for him about where exactly she was standing because I didn't quite spell it out. Like it's okay to have a little bit of mystery, but when your reader can't even picture what's going on in the first paragraph, it kind of renders it a little bit useless. You can only have so many questions. What I have learned is that it's okay to have questions about the motivations and have sort of a mystery what's going on, but if your reader can't even picture what's happening because they have no idea where your character is, they have no idea, you know, is this burn on her, what's going on, it loses the reader. So I had to go back in and fix a little bit of that. And as you can see, he wrote here, if you're following along on your own, first paragraph, where are we? Meaning, where is she? So it's not until the third paragraph of my first draft that I mentioned that she's in the kitchen. So in my final draft, some of the big changes that I made was defining the burn more. So the cool water streamed gently over my arm, the burn there transforming to a dull ecstasy. That is just obviously a very small change, adding just the word there, but it gives a better sense, a better visual of what exactly is going on instead of just some vague burn. And I changed slow burning to now dying, just because slow burning implies that the fire is going to continue to burn, and now dying gives a better visual of what I was trying to express. I think someone in another class had given that suggestion to change that. Here I changed a cloud, or was it smoke? This gave a chance for us to get into my main character's head more immediately instead of just being this vague narrator. We immediately know, I mean, I'd said I before, but I really wanted us to get into her head and for us to know this was going to be a deep character story. So moving on, as you can see, I got rid of bang bang because the next sentence reads, in my first draft, the loud knocks sounded like shots firing down the hall. So mentioning shots and mentioning bang bang is quite redundant. And my teacher had suggested someone knocked / banged on the front door. The reason for that was it would change it from a passive tense to an active tense. While I totally get what he was doing, I did like the way that passive sounded in this because I still wanted to stick with my main character. I wasn't quite ready to introduce a second character this early in the story, so I kept it passive. But I did agree with the redundancy. And so here we mentioned I quickly turned off the kitchen faucet and grabbed a towel, blah, blah, blah. And so I still didn't mention exactly where my character was. I didn't move kitchen up to the first paragraph, but because I got rid of bang bang, suddenly her where is now just a few sentences in. Technically it's still in the second paragraph, but there wasn't as much of a break with this. And so to jump into our second paragraph of my first draft, here you can see if you compare the two paragraphs, I had much more description of her action. So I quickly turned off the kitchen faucet and grabbed a towel, half shuffling, half running to the door, praying I would make it in time. I was almost there, hand outstretched, when I stubbed my toe on those goddamn steel-toe boots Josh had to have. The second round of knocks started heavier than the last, with the hallway behind me remained quiet. Whew! And let's take a look at what I ended up finally doing. Loud knocks sounded like shots firing down the hall. So since I removed the bang bang, it didn't need to be redundant. I didn't need to have the there. I quickly turned off the kitchen faucet and grabbed a towel, half shuffling, half running to the door, praying Josh and Lily wouldn't wake up. So instead of keeping it some vague, like the hallway behind me remained quiet, I just went right in with who exactly she needed to be quiet for. Even though we don't quite know who Josh and Lily are yet, we understand that she's being quiet for other people in her space. And so that's a way that I provided some sort of answer. I gave some more context, but it still asked questions without being so vague that you're starting to get frustrated. I was almost there, hand outstretched, when I stubbed my toe on Josh's goddamn toed work boots. So I removed that Josh had to have. I removed some of that just clutter at this point. We still understand her frustration with the goddamned part. We don't need to continue to beat on that. Plus, we don't want to lose track of the main action of the story. If we're starting to go off in all these different directions, all these different thought narratives, we are losing our focus on the main action that's happening in this first opening scene right in front of us. So I keep it focused there with my final draft. This part, the next part, I clung on to for the life of me. I even had it in my second draft. He crossed it off both times. Basically, my character swore. She has a little comment, that thought came to me without warning, as all my thoughts had done lately. It used to bring me a strange tug of pride, not anymore, because she used to swear. Now, I just kind of liked this tidbit in a character. I was sort of going for like, oh, see, she's changed. She used to be like this perfect, you know, put together person, but now she's like losing herself. And I did end up removing it, mostly because I don't reference it again. I think I could go back in and tie in her swearing again, maybe having her like say some sort of like profanity like towards the end. I don't know. It just wasn't strong enough to keep tied throughout the story. So I do get what he means, how this is another distracting thought that's taking away from the main focus of the action scene. So in the end, I did get rid of it, even though I really liked it, and I'll probably use it somewhere else. And yeah, so he commented even on the first one, he's like, why do we need this? And then the second one, watch how stronger it is if you cut it out. And by the final draft, I was like, okay, fine, Chris, you got me. You're right. It's tighter. I'll move on. And so then I kept the next paragraph somewhat the same after I removed that part, but then, so going to the final one of the first page, the original reads, sensing an impending third round coming, I opened the door quickly. A policeman stood up straight, fist poised to knock. My heart sank into my stomach as I registered who he was. A big problem with that, so third round, it just all started to be kind of clunky. We get the idea. Someone's knocking at the door. You don't need to keep pushing that point. Quickly, that's an adverb that just, you can imagine if somebody here is knocking, they're going to open the door quickly, especially because she ran to the door. Change the policeman to a policeman. Removing the was important because we hadn't seen this person yet. We didn't know who it was, so it wasn't like we were identifying that's the policeman. It was a policeman, if that makes sense. Stood up straight, fist poised to knock. That's another sort of redundant thing in this text in specific. Like, it really tightens it up because we can kind of get the visual. He was knocking, you know, obviously the reader can picture exactly what that looks like. So I tightened it up even more with his suggestion. I opened the door to a policeman. Still has a lot of suspense, still is asking a lot of questions, but without all of this that came before it that slowed down the pace. I decided to add more description of the policeman here. I took that opportunity. My heart sank to his stomach as I took in the tall athletic build and those bright blue eyes I remembered all too well. This starts to pose even more questions. It doesn't take away from the action of the story because this is a direct thought in the scene. You know, she's not like reflecting back, she's looking at the man right in front of her, and we get more of a description. That was a lot of critique that I had from my classmates, was that they had no idea what this guy looked like. So even though we don't need description of exactly how his actions are being portrayed, since that is more evident with the verbiage that I used that he had been knocking before, we do sort of need some sort of description of what he looks like. And so just adding this line, bright blue eyes I remembered all too well, suddenly we were poised with, oh my gosh, this is someone that she knows. This is possibly a romantic interest because she remembers his eyes. And then his face had lost some of the roundness I remembered. So obviously she knows this person from pretty far in the past to have remembered him with more boyish features. But the newly sharpened features only made him more handsome. So now we know some significant time has passed, that he's grown more into a man. The officer is no longer a fresh-faced boy straight out of the academy. This was a man. So we also know that he is from the academy. So even with that short description, we get a lot of context here. We know that she knows him from the past, that she knows him from the academy, answering more questions about her. And we get more tension, especially with this line, damn, I should have fixed my hair. So obviously this is somebody that she also wants to impress. Where in the first draft, we don't really get much of that. You know, my heart sank in my stomach as I registered who he was. Damn, I should have fixed my hair. So we kind of know, like, okay, she knows him-ish because she registers who he was and she wants to fix her hair, but we don't really know much past that. So by just adding a couple sentences, I answered, or not even answered more questions, but posed more questions with context. This is a line actually that he had given me in my opening scene. Yes, I said quickly, then pressed a finger lightly to my lips. Baby is sleeping, please come in. I ended up removing it in the final draft, not because it wasn't a good line, but because it did feel a little bit clunky. It just, when I was picturing the scene out, it read a little bit too short for how I imagined her character to be. So I just changed it to, yes, I said quietly, trying to control my pounding heart. I attempted to smooth out my hair and brace myself for the inevitable recognition. And so that part might be even a little bit redundant. Obviously, we know at this point that she knows him, but I really wanted to stress that this is what she's worrying about. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing page by page, because like I said, this would make this a very long video. But if you kind of just put up the two together, you can really see what exactly I changed. And with his notes that my professor gave, you can kind of see the why. You know, he removed a lot of redundancies, like, I have a problem with adverbs. I think a lot of people do, but sometimes I just feel like in your first draft, you just need to get them out there and then to go back and delete them later. Like, I just need to write them first. Removed a lot of I saids, because at this point when you only have two characters talking, it's pretty clear who is talking at what point as long as you are keeping consistent. So the said part can start to feel a little bit redundant and remove you from the story. So that's something I did. I added some more inner thought because I really wanted to tighten our connection with her in the final draft, and I had the yes I did, but I didn't include the said because you obviously know she is the one talking. And here is where, so while I do think my style in this is a lot more tight than it normally is, there were some things that I kept. I think of my style as very much so breathing. I tend to have longer sentences with two, oh my god, I'm forgetting my grammar. I'm sorry, but like two compound, I think it's like a compound sentence when you have two actions or two verbs happening. Oh my gosh, it's been so long since 8th grade. But so here he corrected in the first draft. I nodded as I walked quickly ahead of him back into the kitchen. Period. He put a period halfway through my sentence. I switched on the light, then cleared off the chair for him to sit. So that's very boom, boom. And that is very much so his writing style as well. And I get why, because it's simple, it moves the story forward more clearly, it doesn't sort of like lull and drag and flow, but that's sort of just more my style. I am not saying that that's right. I may watch this video back in 5 years and be like, oh my god, Haley, no, he was so right, what are you thinking? But I just tend to have more two-part sentences like that. So here, I still kept it pretty much the same. I nodded as I walked ahead of him back into the kitchen, switching on the light, then clearing off the chair for him to sit. That's just my own personal style. I feel like I didn't want it to be two distinct actions. I kind of just want it to be a flow, a transition. She's walking to the kitchen, she cleared off the chair. Okay, now we're gonna move forward. And so here is a rare instance where I actually added more than took away. I wanted more of an interaction with Josh because, Mark. Chris, what's his name? Oh my god, I'm sorry. Did I really name him Chris and my teacher's name is Chris? That's confusing. Yes, I did. Excellent. I just realized that. So I wanted more of an interaction with Chris before the husband Josh walks into the picture, just because Chris is going to be a more prominent role in my short story and I didn't want to distract so quickly with a third character. So I gave a little bit more context, a little bit more back and forth. And I stopped referring to him as Officer Mark. So in my original draft, she knew him from the past, but not as an officer. I ended up changing her profession, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But because she knew him more personally, she would not think of him as Officer Mark, she would think of him as Chris. And so I always refer to him as Chris in my final draft. And I just have to point out one more time, another example. Sarah, Josh's voice sounded groggily behind me. Nix to groggily. Sarah, Josh's voice questioned behind me. I can't help it with the adverbs, guys. I'm sorry. And one thing that I had done a lot in my first draft, that's obviously a very well talked about taboo in writing, not that it's always a necessary rule, but I did a lot of telling, not showing. So just for an example, very simply, when I'm talking about, this is on page 5 of my first draft, so we moved back home, well, my home, to raise our precious daughter in the quaint village of Round Pond, Maine, in a house purchased with the help of my excited parents. So it's just a simple word, excited, but it's like, why are they excited? I don't give any sort of context. I don't explain their motivations, and even though they're not an important character, it's just telling you they're excited, and it's like, that is sort of useless. It doesn't really tell us anything as far as what's going on. So even though it's a pretty simple thing, but one thing I changed it to was, so we moved back home, well, my hometown, to raise our daughter in the quaint village of Bristol, Maine, in a rental found with the help of my parents, who couldn't have been more thrilled to have me and Lily near them where we belonged. So that gives a lot more context about the type of her parents and why she might harbor this grudge against them just because they have this attitude. We can get a lot more from that sentence of giving them a slight motivation and not just throwing on a telling verb or a telling descriptor saying that they're excited. We answer the question more. Now, there were some things that I didn't change that upon further reflection, and if I had had more patience with this story and more time, I probably would have changed. So just for example, reading this back, oh, and I should mention, this is obviously going to have spoilers in it if you did want to read the short story first. So, you know, I'm going to talk about what happens in the end. So, but the quote-unquote villain, antagonist, whoever, of this mystery, Mrs. Freeman, well, I wouldn't go around telling people that. You never know who may be listening. One note that he had, that's too on the nose. It's too suspicious. I think I ended up keeping that line, and I kind of wish I hadn't. Did I keep it? Let me see. Yes. Is that so? Beth laughed. Well, I wouldn't go around telling people that. You never know who may be listening. I did change it to a more lighthearted line, not so she leaned in, finishing dramatically. This just felt very mwahaha villainy, and that was some of the feedback I got from other classmates as well, and I completely agree with that. And I think I would still even possibly remove that line if I were to do another draft of this, just because it is a little bit too pointed. But I really wanted to add some suspicious characters in this story. That's something this story is lacking more if it was more of a mystery, which is what I originally wanted it to be. But I'm going to talk about things that it still needs improvement on a little bit towards the end of this video. And to go into more of the general feedback I got on my first draft. So one of the things a lot of people pointed out was that it did feel more like what I had talked about in the beginning. So it did a lot of this. You know, we'd have some action and then it'd kind of dip back down, and then something dramatic would happen and it'd dip back down. And so it didn't have that constant rising action. And that's something I tried to fix in this by tightening it up. And even though I did have some, I wouldn't say flashbacks, but some thought of her thinking back to the past, it was always in a way that kept the intensity of the story moving forward. So, you know, if she was spending some time thinking about Chris, it was in a dramatic rising the tension way, and so that we got a better understanding of the characters. At least that was my objective. You guys can let me know if I achieved that or not. I probably still could do a better job, but that is what I did try to focus on in drafts moving forward. Another huge change I made that everybody in my second draft really complimented on was in the beginning, in the first draft, she was an aspiring dancer who, because of her pregnancy, had to stop, and then they had to move back to Maine, and it just didn't really make that much sense, and it didn't really relate to the story, her being a dancer and her now being home, other than that she had this aspiring career. I decided to really tie it in together more tightly in the final story. So she now knew Chris because she also was a detective. There was even more backstory of her being unreliable, and so it made us question her even more with the whole, you know, she had been put on administrative leave because she had an incident where she shot somebody or shot at somebody who was innocent. And so, and this part isn't brought up by her, it's brought up by her husband. And so the fact that he's the one who brought it up, even though she is a first-person narrator, shows that she might not be too trustworthy. And so I kind of just played with that unreliable narrator even stronger. And I think it gave us more understanding of her relationship with Chris. And also, by having her have that incident, one of the feedbacks a lot of the feedback I should say I had gotten from my first draft was that her husband was almost too much of a douchebag to the point where you're questioning, why the heck did she even marry this guy? Like, he is just constantly ungrateful. He's constantly moody and whiny, no redeeming qualities. But in this, we start to see, even though he still is a little bit of a douchebag, it's kind of for good reason. He's concerned about her. I think that's something that if I were to do another draft of this, I would express that even more. I don't like it when characters are just so clearly douchey, because then, yeah, it's like, why would she have married him? What did she even fall in love with him for? And that's just not how many people are in real life. So I hoped that gave him some dimension. And a really big piece of feedback I got as well, and that I still think I didn't quite achieve in the final draft either, was Beth, Mrs. Freeman. So I think in the final draft I referred to her more as Beth just because the Mrs. Freeman kind of felt clunky. And I wanted to put her more on the same level as my main character instead of just being this more maternal figure. Plus there was like a Chief Freeman, and it was just too similar. I wanted to give the characters more distinct names. So, but the big problem was, so Beth, if you have read the story, as you know, she is the one who ends up setting the fires. And I did try to give her a little bit more of a clearer motivation for that, and a clearer explanation. So kind of jump through the story. You know, she kind of explains her motivation in the first, but it seems to sort of come out of left field. Like, I'd obviously given a little bit of an explanation when she talks about her family history and of her wanting to be a part of the fire department. But we didn't really get to know her. And you'd think, as somebody who was such a pivotal part of the story, the one setting the fires, she would have been more of an integrated role in the short story. And that's something still in the final draft I don't think I fully achieved. I think I could have done a better job about her and my main character Sarah's relationship. My fear was by focusing too much on Beth, it would have made her more suspicious. I really was going for the gotcha thing, but I don't think I did a good job with that, if I'm being blatantly honest, just because I relied on just having her be in the background as a way to trick the reader, and that's not really tricking them in a way that's a strongly written twist. It's in a cowardly twist, because basically, obviously, you're not going to suspect her because I hardly talk about her, and that is not a good move. So that is one piece of big criticism I do have in my final draft. I tried to integrate their relationship a little bit more to give her a little bit more of a context. You know, she talks about how her mom doesn't really like her. I kind of try to not villainize her a little more, but give her more personality, basically. But I think I still could have done a better job in giving those two more of a relationship. Maybe that was her mentor in her life. Whatever, I'd have to play with it more. And another piece of critique that I got was that they didn't understand my main character's final action either. I did want to keep it sort of vague, so I wouldn't say vague, but just, I didn't really want to spell it out. I liked that mysterious ending. Once again, I don't know if I did a good job with that, but I did expand upon the ending a lot more in my final draft. So I tried to make it less vague. So originally, do you burn Sarah? This is Beth talking. Do you burn Sarah? Do you burn to be the person you truly are? And that's like, it was just way too corny. So it's still a little bit corny, but like, do you burn to be the person you truly are? Like, what does that even mean? So I changed it. You burn, don't you, Sarah? You burn to be the person you used to be, the person you know you are supposed to be. Is it still a little corny? Yes. Could I fix it up? Yes. But I tried to give more of an explanation of what I was talking about. Obviously, these are two deranged women, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't understand what they're saying and what their motivations are. And so I really wanted my character to take more direct action and to really make us be in her head in this final scene, because I mean, this is the final scene, this is an important moment, and I felt she was a little bit too distant here, even though in my mind I wanted her to be distant. She's losing, you know, her sense of self and like sense of good, and she's sort of like allowing herself to be dissolved into this other reality where she doesn't care, she's free. It was a little too distant, and for a first person narrative where we are so in her head, I didn't want to quite go that far. So I added a lot more action. So I grabbed the match and lit it. So she herself lit the match instead of already being lit. That shows her action, her choice. The sounds of the flame catching me gave me goosebumps. Or the flames catching gave me goosebumps. I threw the match on the trail of gasoline. It caught quickly, and a snake of dancing fire worked its way to the other side of the police station, engulfing it fully. The winter night didn't touch me. I finally felt a part of something bigger than myself again. I felt alive. So once again, I added more description in the final scene. It's the final scene. It's a big scene, and a lot of feedback was that my ending in my first draft felt a little bit weak. It kind of just slowly died out, and instead I wanted to build it bigger. Oh, and sorry, to jump back, I didn't want to do too much jumping back and forth because I knew it'd get confusing. So he had commented, I'm confused by the ending and how she got the burn on her arm. So in my final paragraph, I tried to describe a little bit more about what happened. I also changed, instead of her dancing shoes, it was her jacket that was really important to her. It was a sense of identity. I added a more intense scene of her actually going into the house, into the fire, instead of just passively watching it. And then I just explained more how she got the burn on her arm that's referenced in the opening scene, so it ties back together. So just to read you what he had to finally say on my first draft. You have a clear writing style, which is great. And that's it. I got it. I'm just kidding. The story as it stands reads as a series of events with no emotional, emotional core. And I totally agree with that. And I think that's because that's how I've noticed I do draft. I think of my stories in a very outlined format. I don't tie in that emotional piece that links the whole story together on an emotional character development level. I do it's very boom, boom, boom. And that's something I've actually talked about in my novel that I had a huge problem with my first draft. I outlined it. So I outlined all the events, but I didn't outline the emotional stakes and the emotional change. And so my story, it just read, this happened and this happened and then this happened. And that seems to be a problem I have with all of my first drafts. So hopefully going forward, I can remember to keep the character at the forefront, not the plot. Because that's what tends to happen. It's just this happened, this happened, this happened, but we don't know anything about the character and their emotional tie itself. So why is she involved in this? Why is she so passionate? So oh yes, that's kind of why I changed her career too. So originally she was a dancer and she was drawn into this story because she felt like it was very weak. And so by giving her a former detective job, we immediately understand why she feels a need to solve this mystery, because she wants her job back and she's a detective, and her stakes are way more invested in the story other than just being like a bored housewife essentially. Not to side with Chris, my character Chris, on that, but he writes, it needs to be bigger. It can't be done a day in the life story. Clearly you want to say something with your main character. What is it? There's also a lot going on. The husband, Chris, do they belong in the story? You're giving them a lot of attention, but don't you think they are side stories? Well, interesting and somewhat compelling. They distract you from the bigger story you're trying to tell. And that's something that he had talked about in class too. So especially with short stories, in novels you have subplots, you have side characters, but in short stories you really can't afford that space. And so I did try to give the husband more of a role. I think I still could have done better at that. And I definitely tried to give Chris more of a role. But it still could have been tightened. I mean, I had Chief Freeman, I had Chris, I had Beth, I had Sarah, I had daughter Lily. That's a lot of characters for this short story that focuses on such a tight plot line. And her marriage problems with her husband arguably are a subplot. So I tried to tie them more into her marriage problems, helped her with her crippling decline, and tied in together more in the final draft. Again, I don't know if I did the best job at that, but that was something I did try to keep in mind going forward. So as I mentioned, there were some things still I think I could have improved upon. A big one was the relationships. Another one, I could have tightened some of the subplots, related it more to the story. I don't know if my ending still made as much sense as I hope it did in my mind when I was writing it. I wonder if I could have given more hints about her decline throughout. I hope that her sort of transcend into darkness didn't come out of nowhere. That was my fear, that I didn't sort of give enough which is kind of why I had mentioned the swearing part in the first draft, because that was going to be a tie-in. Like, I was going to use that symbolism of her cursing throughout the story to sort of mark her steady decline. And I didn't really do it, so I think there could have been a little bit more symbolism there so that we got a more foreshadowing of where she was going to end up. There were some things that he gave feedback on that you will see that I did not change because I really liked them, and that's something that sometimes you just gotta do. And some of my classmates liked it, some of them didn't, but when I'm talking about specifically, and it's funny that he wrote this because, where's my first time doing it? Okay, so it's when I sort of start to do these quick sentence, almost poem prose, quick paced action paragraphs. So where is it on this one? Yeah, so I do it twice, and what I liked about this, the vibe I get, was that she was kind of toning out, or is that the word I'm looking for? Tuning out. She was tuning out these moments. So she goes home and she starts to fight with her husband. At this point, she is so disconnected from her husband that I felt that this really best represented that. I returned home a few hours later. Josh asked where I was. I ignored him. He asked if I was with Chris. I lied and said no. He asked again where I got the burn on my arm. I left again. So it reminds me of when you're sort of tuning a person out, when you're blocking out an event, when you're not quite connected with something, you kind of see it in like this quick-paced, zoned out way. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but I really enjoyed playing with that structure. It was a risk. It's something I had never tried before, but I liked it, and a lot of other people really liked it, but he did not like it. He wrote, what happens next feels rushed, assuming you ran out of time. He actually thought I like ran out of time doing that. And while I definitely was like turning this in last minute, these were definitely conscious choices. So it made me laugh. And like I said, maybe he's right. Maybe I will look back on this and be like, what was I thinking? But that's all part of writing. You take risks, you try things out, but I did end up keeping it, but I did tighten it up. So here in the second part of me doing this, everything pretty much stayed the same, other than like I changed obviously because she changed her career, but then I tuned her back in when he started talking about something important. I reiterated it was temporary. He said it wasn't. Chief McGinnis had called for a check-in. He called to discuss the future of my appointment. I was in India. I knew what that meant. So that's sort of bringing us back into the moment because he says something that she connects with, and so I start to describe that scene a little bit more, if that makes sense. I hope it came across. Let me know if it worked for you or if it didn't, or don't let me know. It doesn't really matter. I already turned it in. But something for you to think about. So there you have it. That is my short story I ended up turning in. So this I didn't get any written feedback on because it was my final project. It was the only thing we were graded on was our final paper. Attendance didn't matter, participation didn't matter, what we got on our first draft didn't matter. All that mattered was our final paper. It was very terrifying, but I did end up getting an A- on it, so that was exciting. So I got a C on my first draft, I got a B+ on my second draft, and I got an A- on my final draft. So not too bad progression. But I hope you could see with those, in my opinion, somewhat little changes, how much the story itself was tightened and changed, and hopefully the character, emotions, everything tied in together into a more complete short story versus just a timeline of events. I hope you guys found this video valuable. I tried to make as much sense as I could. Obviously, I am still a student. I am still learning. You might look at some of the changes I did and been like, what were you thinking? You might see some of his advice and been like, you definitely should have taken that. Or you might read my short story in general and be like, wow, you cannot write. This is garbage, which is totally a valid opinion. It's best for you to know now anyway, so you don't have to follow my journey much longer. I'm just kidding. If you like these type of videos, please feel free to let me know. If you don't like them, if you felt that it was way too all over the place and it wasn't helpful, also let me know. It is valuable for me to look back and to think back about why I made the changes I did. And as I said, there were probably some changes I made that I didn't reference because I don't have my other classmates' notes in front of them, which I found just as valuable as my professors. So I will put up in that Google Drive some examples of some classmate feedback that I found really valuable. It's also really good to read their feedback and see how to critique others' works. I like to think I do an okay job critiquing other works. I hope that other writers at least find it valuable who are in my class, but there are some people in my class who are phenomenal with it. Like, if I could hire them as an editor, I 100% would. Kyle is one of those people, Kyle Coletti. I will definitely include his feedback in my short story Google Drive pages as well. He actually was in my writing a novel class last semester, and so he has actually seen my first few chapters of my novel and given me so much feedback on that as well. Kyle, if you're watching this, can I please hire you as like an editor? I would feel guilty like having him as a critique partner because I feel like his editing skills way surpass mine and it just would not be an even trade. But hiring him, I would definitely do it. So Kyle, if you ever decide to start a business doing that, you gotta let me know. All right, that's all I got. Well, I mean, it's not all I got. I could keep going, but like I said, I don't want this video to be hours long. As far as videos like this I plan to do in the future, I really want to do a chapter 1 or at least first page, first draft, final draft of my novel. Maybe it doesn't even have to be the final draft, but the draft I'm on now. No, it'll probably be final draft. I don't really feel comfortable because it's probably going to change by the time it ever gets signed. One thing I really want to do also is my query letter and synopsis, because I know that is something that I find looking at examples of a query letter is way more valuable than just learning how to write one. However, with that, I think I would want to still wait until I actually was signed on an agent before I did that, because otherwise what's the point of seeing my final draft if it wasn't a successful one, if that makes sense. So that's something that's probably going to come much further down the line. But I can certainly do this with other projects that I have had, especially in class where I have to turn in sort of a final draft. Okay, I am like clearly getting winded. I'm not used to talking this long. So I am praying to the editing gods that this video is under an hour. I have no idea, you guys. And I do hope that you found it valuable and that some of the changes I made were helpful to you to sort of see my walkthrough and my process. I think that you will probably get most out of this by really reading through my professor's editing notes, because that's when you really get a sense of why he cut certain things he did. And sort of one thing that you can do to get that understanding of how it works better is to kind of like read under what I wrote and then read it as he fixed it. And you'll see that it does read much better, a lot of the notes that he left. And to say a little bit more about his writing style, like I said, he writes thrillers. I haven't read any of his novels, but I have read some of his short stories that he walked through with us in class. And his style is very much Thomas Harris, Dan Brown, quick-paced, full action. I mean, he still obviously, has like character, emotional growth. If he does a better job with that than Dan Brown even. But yeah, I would say kind of a mix between Thomas Harris, who wrote Silence of the Lambs, and Dan Brown, who wrote The Da Vinci Code. So definitely check him out. Check out his website, check out his books. I know he is quite successful in his field and he has some really exciting projects coming up. I don't think I am allowed to share what they are, but I know he's somebody you're going to probably want to follow in the future, at least in my opinion. But I just have to rave about all my professors. They've all been so amazing. I have been very, very lucky. I know that some people say that they don't get good writing professors at times. I've heard horror stories, but I feel like I have really lucked out with all of the ones I've gotten. All right, that's all I got. That's all she wrote. If you follow me on Goodreads, you know I'm reading like 1,000 of those. Oh yeah, I have to end with what book I've read. I haven't done one of these in so long. By these, I mean a video. I am currently reading, well, obviously I'm reading The Anatomy of Story, as I talked about in my last video, but I am also reading, what did I just start? Oh, I'm reading Educated by Tara Westover. It's nonfiction. I'm reading it for my Works book club. And it is about a woman who was in a Mormon cult and she escaped and had to basically educate herself entirely because she did not get an education as a kid. And there's probably way more exciting things than that, but I am on chapter 1, so I could not tell you what they are. Alright, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye. I don't know how to wave. Bye. What are you doing? Zach. Zach. I know he